What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Frankie Bones, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the CDL, which is the Professional Call of Duty League, and some roster changes that happened between the first major tournament and the start of the Major Tournament 2 league matches, which are starting up this Friday. So, one of these changes was much anticipated and has pretty much dominated the social media scene in terms of what moves would be led, potential leaks, baits, all stuff like that. So, that roster change obviously being for OpTic Texas, who had some difficulties this offseason in terms of making a decision about what roster they were going to carry going into Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which is supposedly the last year of the King, Scump Seth Abner. So there's a lot of pressure on this decision, and ultimately they decided to let go of Dashi, also known as Brandon, who's been with the organization for about 5 years, competing on different OpTic Call of Duty League teams. So this is a bit of a surprise, and as you can see here in the graphic, OpTic Texas has went on to sign Huke, aka Kyler, and this is an interesting fit because there are other rumors that I'll dive into here now that could have made more sense, but ultimately I'll go into why that was ultimately almost the only decision that they could have made, looking to make a change here before Major 2, and ultimately get enough points to get into the top 8, which is the top 8 qualify for the Call of Duty League Championship, with the bottom 4 teams being relegated. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are rumors that involved around Alec Arcides, who in this offseason made a pretty big move by leaving Atlanta FaZe. There was a lot of drama around why things ultimately did not work out between this team, because this team was pretty dominant during the Cold War days, as well as Vanguard. They ultimately weren't able to win a tournament, but the amount of top 2s and the consistency that the team had ultimately most likely would have warranted running it back and trying to figure out what may have gone wrong. So the main issue that we ran into, the main issue that OpTic Texas ran into when trying to acquire Arcides was that this year the league announced that they would have the option for a 3-year contract, which ultimately the contracts are a little bit tricky in terms of how they work, and if it actually is a fully guaranteed 3-year deal and stuff like that. So ultimately they ran into some difficulties with it being such a large buyout. LAG ultimately paid a massive bag to Atlanta FaZe to pay the transfer fees for Alec Arcides, so that was really the main thing that they ran into issues with. This move would have made a lot of sense because it would have ultimately been more of a 1-for-1 sub. You'd be taking out your main AR in Brandon Dashi and adding in Alec Arcides. So this move would have made a lot of sense, but ultimately there were too many barriers in the way to be able to get the deal done. And we'll talk about the second rumor here that more aligned with sort of what was going on over the past couple of days and ultimately where they landed with the roster change. So the second move that OpTic Texas was potentially looking to make during this transfer window before the Major 2 qualifiers was to pick up Pred, aka AG, the Thunder Down Under. He won the Rookie of the Year last year in Call of Duty Vanguard, putting up spectacular numbers, really turning around a franchise in the Seattle Surge that had been going through some difficulties over the past couple of years. And ultimately, they were able to get an event win last year in Vanguard, which was awesome. This is a very interesting sort of rumor and note to be talking about in terms of OpTic Texas getting Pred, because all signs seem to indicate that Pred really does look to join OpTic Texas at some point. The way that the CDL contracts work traditionally is a 2-year deal with a 1-year guaranteed, as well as an option for the team for the second year. So with Pred being a rookie last year, this would mean that his contract will run out at the end of this season, and he'll have the opportunity to join whichever team he would like, as well as they put up the massive bag that he is going to command. And ultimately, Scump is the highest paid player in the league, understandably so, as the king and the codfather, but OpTic will certainly have plenty of money to throw around come this offseason when they look to rebuild their team as well as their brand and really create a strong identity going forward with Seth stepping away from the competitive scene. So to go on to talk a little bit more about the validity of the rumors of Pred moving on to OpTic Texas in some sort of buyout or trade situation, this has been widely confirmed by both OpTic Texas as well as Shotzi on stream confirming, as well as AG, that ultimately there was a very strong push to be able to get the transaction done and for OpTic to acquire Pred and pair him alongside Shotzi as their sub-duo and moving Seth over to the flex role, with Illy maintaining an AR role and switching over to the main AR. Ultimately, Pred went on to talk about on his stream after he got home from a very, very long flight. He had to come over back from Australia where he was dealing with some visa issues and ultimately delaying the team from scrimmaging or anything like that. But ultimately, Pred went on to say that there was about a 10-day period where OpTic had to try and make the transition to be able to make the deal get done, which is very interesting. Ultimately, Shotzi went on to talk about how Arcides was their main interest in terms of replacing Dashi, but ultimately when that fell through, the idea of Pred was brought up as obviously this is a very high-profile move, and a lot of people think would make a very important and direct impact on the team to be able to turn around the ship and get them going in the right direction as the season progresses on. But ultimately, Pred talks about the deal was not able to get done, using quotes like, "We tried everything that we could to get the deal done," really showing the intent that he does want to join OpTic at the end of this season, but ultimately nothing was able to get done in regards to a trade or acquisition. So this ultimately brings us to the decision that the OpTic Texas camp decided to go with and the roster change that they made, which was picking up Huke the Nuke, aka Kyler, and I'll go into a couple of reasons why ultimately this move made the most sense. It was the path with least resistance and ultimately made sense for the difficulties that they are running into, and again I'll go on to explain that a little bit more here in the video. So the first thing that happened ultimately, if we go chronologically, and is the second team that we're going to be talking about in this video, is that the LAG team ultimately was looking to make moves in regards to most of their roster. Their LAG Academy team ultimately had some great success in the first Challengers Cup, or the Challengers tournament, and they ultimately ended up going on to win that tournament. So following that, there were a lot of questions about what roster the team was going to go with, and this was sort of the first piece of news that we heard from the cookie crumbling from the LAG camp, to where LAG puts out a tweet and mentions that they've mutually parted ways with Huke and the impact that he had on their team, and ultimately he was looking like a cornerstone piece for them to build their franchise around, as well as young guys like Spart, but ultimately this didn't work out, and they mutually agreed to part ways, and Huke became a free agent. So ultimately that's probably the largest reason why Huke ultimately was the correct move for OpTic to make, because as a free agent there is no buyout or any compensation that the team has to give back. For instance, if they were looking to buy out the contract of Arcides or Pred, there were rumors going around that this would be north of the neighborhood of $500,000, which in terms of the Call of Duty League is a ton of money. Obviously there are a lot of teams that have outside investments from people that run more legitimate businesses. Like for LAG, the owner is Stan Kroenke, who owns multiple professional sports franchises, but ultimately with him being a free agent, this made absolutely the most sense for the team at this time. Outside of the fact that Huke was a free agent, so ultimately there wasn't any cost for a buyout, and he didn't have to get the largest contract, although ultimately I think he's a great player, so I'm not sure what the contract looks like, but definitely gives him a lot of flexibility. The other main reason that I think this was ultimately the best move for OpTic Texas is that 3 of the players on the team, Shotzi and now Huke as well as Illy, all played together for multiple years on the Dallas Empire, dating back to MW19, where they ultimately had won the championship, which was an online COD, and a lot of people like to call it the Mickey Mouse. But regardless, they ultimately had a very dominant season, going on to win champs, and the team really had some good momentum, and they coined the term, XEO, which is the three of them. They as well have experience playing on the Dallas Empire in 2021, and the next game as well in Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. So there's a lot of familiarity between most of the players. This is a 4v4 league at this point. I'm not sure if we'll ever go back to 5, but with 3/4 of your team already having played together, this may help resolve some of the issues that they were running into, which they document in terms of not being on the same pace as a team overall and really not feeling like a team. I feel like this familiarity for Huke with the players, as well as the OpTic head coach, Rambo Ray, who was also a part of those Dallas Empire teams, I feel like this ultimately gives them a great shot to become successful early on here and ultimately make some much needed changes to overall improve the team dynamic. So ultimately, one other thing that happened as a result of this acquisition is that ultimately they picked up a submachine gun player while also dropping an assault rifle player. So this will come at the switch of positions from Seth, aka Scump, who will be moving over to the flex role, where he'll mainly be using an assault rifle but can also switch in between depending on certain situations on the map, as well as some other factors. But ultimately that's the big change to where if they're going to be able to acquire the teamwork and everything that's necessary for this team to succeed, in addition to Seth with a role change and adding in a 2 new team member, this may be a little difficult for their team, but I have the utmost respect for Huke, and I think ultimately they're going to be able to make a run and really turn the ship around. The last thing that I wanted to cover in this video, as it pertains to OpTic Texas, is looking forward at the schedule that they have ahead, leading up to the Major 2 tournament, which is in Boston, at the beginning of February, from February 2nd to February 5th. So as you look down the list in the league qualifier games as they lead up to the major tournaments, these games will help with seeding and ultimately is really important for a team to get off to a good start in these matches to get themselves in the winner's bracket and ultimately provide an easier road for them to make it to the championship. So going down the schedule, like I'd mentioned in my past video, the first match that OpTic Texas is going to have in the Major 2 qualifying stage will be against the Boston Breach. I think this is a very gettable matchup depending on how the team is clicking early on. Boston Breach has also seen some troubles outside of the first major, where the M4 was still allowed to be used by players. And ultimately, a lot of people are saying that Boston Breach are M4 merchants, things like that. They just really haven't looked the same since the M4 has been GA'd and the SCAR has been implemented as the assault rifle for the players. So definitely a gettable game there. That is going to be the only game that OpTic Texas has for this upcoming weekend. In the following week, they will have 2 matchups on January 20th on Friday. They will square off against the Seattle Surge, which I'm not sure if it's quite a grudge match per se, but definitely interesting with all the rumors going around with OpTic trying to acquire Pred. And as well, the next day, on Saturday the 21st, they will square off against the Toronto Ultra, who again made some changes in the offseason, but looks like an incredibly strong team, led by the acquisitions of rookies Scrappy. Really just cool to see some rookies coming in and making an immediate impact, but I think this is going to be a really tough matchup, as well as Seattle for OpTic Texas. The other 2 matchups that will happen the following week, on January 28th and 29th, first they'll square off against the Vegas Legion, who, if people are familiar with Call of Duty, have not had a lot of success over the past few years, really haven't gone the lengths of investing money into their team to have good placing, things like that. Some of that has changed this year as they picked up a full squad of players outside of Donnie Temp, definitely a winnable game for this OpTic team, as well as wrapping it up on Sunday, squaring off against Atlanta FaZe. Everybody knows the rivalry about Atlanta FaZe. They've been looking really good after their pickup of Slasher to replace Arcides, a veteran who's really trying to galvanize this group and get them back to their winning ways that they missed so much this past year. So ultimately, it's going to be a tough road for OpTic Texas. Really hope to try and go 3-2 in some of these matchups to be able to steal one from a team like Surge, Ultra, or FaZe. I think that OpTic's going to be able to handle the other two teams in Boston and Vegas, but we're going to have to stay tuned to find out and see how this team starts to gel in the coming days and weeks. Quickly here at the end of this video, like I'd mentioned, I just want to talk briefly about the other change that happened with a CDL roster, which came by the way of LAG, the Los Angeles Guerrillas. So I mentioned this a little bit prior to where Huke was on this team. Ulti was released as a free agent, as well as Alec, Arcides, Neptune, and Spart. Alec, Arcides, and Spart both received 3-year contracts at the beginning of this year, looking to establish them as the cornerstones of their franchise, but ultimately this move did not work out. Like I had mentioned as well at the beginning of the video, the Los Angeles Guerrillas Academy team, which not every team does have an academy team, but ultimately I think is something that the teams want to have moving forward, allowing for more people to be in the league and ultimately have more visibility on the esport as a whole. But the LAG Academy did go on to win the first Challengers tournament, and ultimately this resonated strongly up through the organization, as ultimately LAG released or ultimately tweeted that Spart and Neptune were going to be moving to the LAG Academy team, as well as 3 of the players from the LAG Academy team joining Arcides on the main squad. So definitely pretty interesting to see only 3 players being called up. I do like Alec a lot, and I think he's a really respectable player and think he can make a great impact on certain teams. But ultimately, the players that were called up to accompany Arcides in this roster are Adam Assault, Joe Deceives, and Exceed, who all played phenomenally throughout the beginning of the game on their way to win the first Challengers tournament. So this move makes a lot of sense, and ultimately some of these guys are superstars that may have been poached off of the academy team by other teams looking to make moves. So I think that this can be a beneficial move for the team. They're really struggling in respawns and hard points, and ultimately you need to be able to win that hard point as well as control. You can't just rely on search and destroy. So unless you are going 2-3-5, which definitely pretty interesting, but their numbers in hardpoint were pretty sad, so this move I think made a lot of sense for the team. The only thing that I would have liked to see is having Diamond Khan as well being added to the roster from the academy team. I think that this move made a lot of sense. Diamond Khan was able to show his skills during the Cold War season while he was playing for NYSL as a substitute, and feel like he looked good enough in this game and potentially the best player on the LAG Academy team, according to numbers and things like that. But ultimately, Connor, aka Diamond Khan, is going to stay on the Academy team, as well as Neptune, Spart, and as well Noisy, who they picked up as their 4th member. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'll show the points here, as you can see. Like I mentioned, only the top 8 teams are going to qualify for the Call of Duty Major Championship, which will be later on this year, I believe, in May. So we'll have to see how everybody does to start off this important Major 2, see if OpTic can hit the ground running with this team and ultimately get some points on the board and get out of last. As you can see, they're tied at 20 points. Which you will receive 10 points for every online qualifier, as well as some points doled out during the major tournaments for wins and placements. So let me know what you think about both of these rosters in the comments down below. Personally, really optimistic about the Huke to OpTic move, and I think that the return of XEO will be important for this team to be able to carry Seth out on a positive note. In terms of LAG, I'm really not sure what to expect from this team, and ultimately expectations can't be high. Really just looking to have good teamwork and build a solid foundation for the organization moving forward. But for now, that's going to do it for me, guys. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me here through another video. I do apologize. I am a little bit sick. So if you guys can hear that in my voice, I apologize. But I look forward to bringing more videos again later this week and throughout the coming months on Call of Duty, GTA, and whatever else you guys want to see. But for now, that's going to do it for me. This has been Frankie Bones, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Peace out.